Hello, and welcome to the first video about our upcoming expansion, Götterdämmerung. I'm Peter Nicholson, Game Director for Hearts of Iron. In this video, we'll introduce the content for a country that so many of you have been requesting, Austria. After the Austro-Hungarian dual monarchy was abolished at the end of the Great War, Austria began to operate as a republic, with reasonably functional elections and a parliamentary system. During the following years, however, numerous conflicts between paramilitary groups, an unstable economic situation, and a general state of dissatisfaction over the perceived iniquities visited upon the Austrian people had created a tinderbox. By 1936, with next to no army due to the Treaty of Saint-Germain-en-Laye, and with Germany seemingly on the prowl, the country found itself facing crises both diplomatic and domestic. Almost all of the focuses you'll find in the historical branch of the focus tree have been drawn from the actions taken by members of the Austrian government in an attempt to stave off the Anschluss. The Treaty of Saint-Germain-en-Laye prevents Austria from building troops, but also stipulates that certain countries would help protect Austria if the unthinkable were to happen. Historically, of course, Austria's guarantors were not drawn into a conflict over the unification of Austria and Germany. But here you have an opportunity to persuade them otherwise. If you value your independence, there'll be a race against the clock to prepare as best as possible. There are different ways of going about getting rid of the Treaty of Saint-Germain-en-Laye, but it won't be easy. If no agreement can be reached, the consequences will be dire. But the Anschluss is coming, you will need those troops, and for that to happen, the treaty will have to go. The later part of the tree is based on what was deemed a hypothetical series of ambitions for an independent Austrian state, depending on their political stance. Post-rearmament, there are quite a few options for both building up the state, but also for expanding and reclaiming your old land. By ripping up the old May constitution, Austria can start afresh down a new path. This begins by reinstating the Herrenhaus. Replacing the parliament with once vilified nobles allows for several different ways of electing a leader. If you want to become empire once more, you will have to rebuild. As soon as you've gotten rid of the treaty with the rebellious rearmament focus, the branch splits in two. One more focused on building yourself internally, and one more expansionist. Depending on your ambitions, you may also join a faction or create your own, before you take on the Germans, Soviets, or strive to form a new Austria-Hungary by attempting to puppet their old lands. Going down the monarchist path will, however, mean an uphill battle to stave off the Anschluss. Your previous guarantors will not come to your aid once they see a monarch on the throne of Austria once more. To reinstate democracy again, like in the monarchist branch, we must first tear up the old constitution, and then before an election can be held, political opposition must be allowed once more. Even with a democratic system in place, the threat of Anschluss remains a very real possibility. Unfortunately, you still have no army and can't train troops yet. Much like the fascists, you will need to request help on the basis of the treaty. Leveraging the fact that you're now a democratic country, Austria will have an easier time convincing their guarantors to allow for rearmament. Otherwise, you could always bribe them, and if they end up rejecting, it means they're not following the treaty, and if they aren't, well, why should you? As with most democratic branches, you will be able to join the Allies, but you can also create your own faction called the Alpine Federation. Either way, your goal will be similar: end fascism in Europe. There will be a federative path accessible to both monarchists and democrats, the Danubian Federation. It starts out as a faction, but it also unlocks the joint focus tree for Austria-Hungary, meaning even if you're democratic, you can now access some Austro-Hungarian federal content. Last out of the political branches is the communist branch. This branch starts out with Austro-Marxism, an ideology situated somewhere in between social democracy and communism. Austria has a long way to go to become a communist state, and for most this road will involve a civil war. To have a fighting chance, the treaty, again, has to go. Austria preparing for civil war simply does not care about what anyone thinks and will be allowed to just shred the treaty and enact emergency measures to rebuild more rapidly. Dealing with civil war is difficult on your own, so there is a choice to be made. You can ask the Soviets for help, or you can try to avoid the civil war entirely by building enough communist support. The final parts of the communist branch will allow for spreading communism in the Danubian countries and countries that historically had an interest in the Danube. The army branch is the largest of the military branches, as this is what Austria mainly focused on historically. There is a major choice you will have to make here, leading you down two separate paths. While Austria was technically allowed to have an air force, it was not prioritized. As such, you will pretty much have to start from scratch. In this branch, there will be two areas of focus: domestic production, or focusing on establishing foreign partnership and importing your fleet. The industrial branch is rather straightforward. There are four main branches, focusing on four different things. From left to right, we have the resources branch for boosting your domestic resources, the infrastructure branch for connecting the country, the economic branch to save your crashing economy, and the industrial branch to build and improve construction of factories. In conclusion, Austria is a country with many challenges before her, but with some cunning plans and strategies, ripping up some treaties and a staunch refusal of German advances, this small country can become quite the powerhouse. Next time, you'll get to see some really special projects.